Our next speaker is Professor Robin Dunbar, who's a Professor of Evolutionary Psychology at the University of Oxford. He is an expert in primate societies and how they develop and how they share, and has recently, some of his research has been in the headlines as part of a study which found that eating alone is the biggest cause of unhappiness besides existing mental illness. So very, very interesting, and it's a great privilege to have him here to speak today. So without further ado, Robin.
Thank you very much. So you're going to do the two most important things in your life, I hope, in a bit. Fried aubergines. I'm absolutely delighted there's fried aubergines. I grew up on aubergines, I love them. So this is going to be a good night. Okay, so, but the two things that you're going to be doing, one is eating together, hopefully, and the other is making friends. And those two things really are central to everything we do as humans. Next slide, please. So if you think about how animals in general feed, they kind of do it like, things are going to be a bit small to see probably at the back. They feed on the go. They don't really sit down and eat stuff. And even next, please, even humans occasionally do stuff on the go. Coffee on the go, sandwiches on the go, and probably too many sandwiches on the go. What's distinctive about the way humans eat is they do it socially. Next slide, please. We sit down and eat family meals, communal meals, village meals, whatever it may be. It's a social activity. And it's interesting in a way, and I've only just realised this in the last couple of years really, that probably the most important context in which we eat is actually in the dark. Next please. For some reason, all our social activities are much more heightened and use the word exciting loosely. I don't mean it just gets you excited. I mean it really seems to have a much bigger punch if they're done in the dark in the evening rather than during the day at lunchtime, right? So if you go to a matinee of some play or band or something, it's much less exciting for you than if you see the evening performance. If you have a lunch with somebody, somehow it's much less engaging than if you have an evening meal with that same person. So there's something weird about doing stuff at night, and distinctively, we eat socially. Okay, so I'm trying to explain to you really how we build our friendships and indeed our communities, because communities are just an extension of our friendships, if you like. It's the same mechanisms involved. So I'm going to try and walk you through that and then come back to social eating in particular. Next, please. Humans share with primates the fact that we're intensely social. Primates are the most intensely social group of animals of any of the animals on the planet. Not excluding even the elephants and the dolphins and horses and other species that are also very social. The primates have particularly the kind of old world monkeys and apes, have a particularly intense form of sociality. It's their major evolutionary development, and it's been the key to their success. So primates have, practically with the dinosaurs when the dinosaurs went extinct, and they've hardly changed in basic shape and format since then. All the other mammals and birds have really undergone considerable morphological change during the course of relatively short periods of time. Primates are sort of pretty much the same to look at now as they were 40, 50 million years ago. Next, please. Now, just to give you a sense of why this form of sociality is so important, I'll show you these data. You can see them right from the back. I particularly like this study, but it's one of many studies that have come out of the woodwork in the last decade or so, showing that your happiness, your health, your well-being, your ability to recover from surgery or accidents or anything like that, even your risk of dying, is directly related to the number of friends you have and the quality of those friendships. What's nice about these data is its heart attack patients. And their measure, their outcome measure, is did you survive for 12 months after your first heart attack? So it's a very, very hard-nosed measure. It's a compilation of about 148 epidemiological studies of heart attack patients, and the question they're asking is, what factors in these people's lives, so it's hundreds of thousands of people contributing to it, it's a very big sample, what factors best predicted their chances of surviving that first year? And you will notice the two big bars, so the size of those bars reflects the magnitude of the effect. The taller the bar, the bigger the effect it had on that probability of survival. The two bars on the left-hand one is the quality of your friendships. They didn't measure the number of friendships, but they had several different measures of the quality of friendship. And that comes out top. The second bar, just in from that, which is nearly as high as giving up smoking. Right, so just give it up now. All the other ones are all the things that most of the medics spend most of their time telling you not to do, right? So in order, it's how much activity, how much physical exercise you have. So that third bar, alcohol consumption, your BMI, your body mass index, how fat you are. At the end, what drug treatments you're on. There were several other things they looked at. There's not a lot to choose between them, and they're all much lower. Right? So just the important message, if you go home tonight with one message in your mind, the secret of life and survival is having friends. Right? You can slob about as much as you like, you can drink as much as you like, sorry, no, you're not supposed to say that. Drink as much as you like. You can be as fat as you like, and you can be on any drugs you like. It's not going to have as much effect as the number and quality of friendships you have. It really is a huge effect. And here's the solution to the biggest problem we have, at least the Treasury has, because I keep telling you about it, and that is the amount of money available for the NHS. You could cut that out overnight by improving people's friendships, right? You would massively reduce the demand on the NHS, just overnight. How you do that, that's another problem. But the solution is obvious, it seems to me. Okay, next slide, please. The problem is that we live in a very small-scale social world, right? So, just to give you a sense of how small that is, this is a graph of the number of friends that people have listed on their Facebook pages. So this is 1 million Facebook pages. So it's whatever it was, 1,000th of Facebook users 2 years ago or something. So this was done probably about 2012, I think. Let me draw your attention to two things. Next slide, please. There's a little tiny yellow blip on the right-hand side where it says 5,000. That's the 5,000 is the limit that Facebook allowed you to have as friends. Right? Tiny little blip there. Those are all professional users. They're aspiring poets and singer-songwriters using Facebook as a cheap fan club, basically, or journalists using it sort of for information exchange and so on. There's a few, quite a few of those are actually products as well. So Cadbury's had, and probably still has, Facebook pages for some of their products. So the good news is, if you're really stuck with friends, for friends, you can befriend Cadbury's Twix bar, and then you get a double hit, because you get both a friend and chocolate. Virtual chocolate. But for the rest of us, we're way down the bottom end. Next, please. That bar, the red bar there, encloses the sort of typical number of friends you have on Facebook. And in this data sample, it's actually lying between about 150 and 250. Yes, there are some people out to the right of that who might have up to 1,000 friends on Facebook. But relatively speaking, it's a very, very small proportion. Most people only have somewhere between 150 and 200, let's say. A few people spill out to 400, 500, a few people spill out to 1,000 or so, but relatively speaking, not that many. But given the number of people on Facebook, a very large number, whatever it is, 1 or 2 billion, whatever it is now, people on Facebook, times some very small probability, still gives you a large number, which explains why everybody knows somebody who has 1,000 friends on Facebook, even though you don't, right? We're all down there. That key number down there is typically, realistically, about 150. That's the normative size of the number of friends and family relationships you have. That's what's known as Dunbar's number. Ironically, that was christened Dunbar's number on Facebook, that well-known emporium of science. And it was christened on there because it was probably about 10 years ago or thereabouts, people suddenly realised they've got all sorts of people as friends on Facebook and they had no idea who they were. And they were starting to cull. It was when the first big period of people culling friends on Facebook, trying to reduce this number. And it got christened Dunbar's number because there was a lot of discussion going on. Somebody else told me this, so I believe it. That they were going, who are all these people? And somebody said, there's this guy, I was in London then, who has this theory that you can only have 150 friends on Facebook. So there are subsequently a number of social networking sites that have been created which only allow you to have small numbers of friends. So path.com only allows you to have 150 friends on their system. So it's picking that number up. Okay. There is a reason why, on average, typically the number is going to be on the high side here, and that's because of the age of people on Facebook. There's a very, very strong age effect on Dunbar's number. Actually varies. It's the average for the population as a whole, and it's a very robust average. You keep picking it up all over the place. But if you look at the number of friends people have offline, friends and family they have offline as well as online, it varies between about 100 and 250 and is negatively related to age. So younger people tend to be closer to 200, 250. Older folk tend to be closer to, that's to say, people about younger than me, 60s or so, tend to have only about 100 to 150. But on average it comes out at 150. That's partly you'd expect them to be on the upper side because most of the users on Facebook are under 30. Right. Okay, next please. So, there you are with your social world of about 150, give or take a bit. It doesn't really look like the picture on the left-hand side, just sort of a morass of people, a homogeneous morass of people. Your social world looks much more like the right-hand picture. It's clumpy. So if you look at who you talk to most often, who you spend most time with, the picture you get, next please, looks much more like this. It's a series of concentric circles. So you're sitting in the middle of that, and these ripples on the pond, you're like the stone being dropped into the pond. These ripples that go out are your layers of friendship. There's the 150, the red circle there, but within that, your social network is layered into a series of quality of friendship, starting in an inner circle at 1.5. We only discovered that a couple of years ago because we thought it started at 5, and we're very puzzled about that. If you look at those numbers, you'll see they have a very distinct scaling ratio. Each layer is 3 times the size of the layer inside it. Right? 5, 15, 50, 150, 500, 1500. And each of those numbers includes everybody that's inside that layer. So the 50 circle there includes the 15 people in the 15 circle. But I used to joke when I was giving lectures about this and say, look, if you look at these scaling relationship, there's a layer missing, and that layer should be at 1.5, and you project backwards. And everybody went, oh, you're mad. And I used to say, no, it's because the world actually consists of 2 kinds of people. One of them can only manage 1 relationship at a time, and the other type of people can manage 2 at a time. And the first are called boys, and the second are called girls. Right? The boys can only have a girlfriend, or whatever, and a best mate, drinking partner, and they can't have them together. It's one or the other. Right? but girls can manage 2 simultaneously. They can have a best girlfriend. It's nearly about 80% of it, those what are called best friends forever. 80% of them are another girl. About 20% are a boy, which is tricky. In addition to their romantic partner, right? So this is a non-sexual relationship. It's very much a kind of intense support relationship. But as you go out through these layers, then what you've got next, please, you can kind of put names to these. There's your intimate friends, 5 close friends, 15 best friends, 50 good friends, 150 just friends. And then you go out beyond that, this ratio keeps going, these layerings, you get 500 acquaintances, and at 1500 seems to be the limit on the number of faces you can put names to. Right? People you can recognize as individuals. Beyond that, they're completely anonymous. And these layers turn out to be the structure of small-scale traditional societies and hunter-gatherers. It appears all over the place in human organization. I think the weirdest place of all we've discovered this is in German residential campsites. So in Germany, in the last decade or so, people have got rid of sold off their houses or flats in the town, gone out and lived on a campsite, a trailer park, if you like, in American sense. And it's become a permanent residence. Although they're often in trailers or huts, beach huts, if you like, they're official addresses for social security. It's all very above board. And it turns out when the campsite owners designed their residential parks, which are set aside from the kind of overnight touring campers, they designed them with these numbers in mind. They tend to be either 150, 500 or 1500 and so on. Absolutely weird, because we didn't, when they made those campsites, we didn't know about these numbers. The other odd thing is, you're looking at the structure of modern armies. This is exactly how modern armies are structured, except that they continue the layerings on in multiples of 3. They don't have the 1.5, and most armies only start at 15. That's a section within a platoon, except for, and this is interesting, is the special forces. So the standard operating unit for special forces is 5. And why is it 5? Remember, these guys, and they're almost all guys, so far at least, is because they have to be able to operate on their own with no support at all behind enemy lines. So it's really, really tough. They have to absolutely guarantee that no matter what happens, they'll stick with each other. And here's why this is important to do with the layerings. The only way you can build relationships at that level of intensity is with very, very small groups. You can't have 150 or 500 people with that degree of emotional commitment to each other. They can only do it with very, very small units. So 5 is what they use. It's also the average size of terrorist cells, by the way, as well. Okay, so there we are. We've picked these numbers up all over the place. Remember, these came from looking at people's actual offline social relationships and looking at the frequency with which they saw people or their emotional closeness to those people. Next, please. You probably won't be able to see this, but we've found these exact same layers in a number of different places. So the top one there is a Facebook data set. It's all right, you're not in there. Right? This is a data set known as the New Orleans Facebook data set, which was released by Facebook very early on in 2009, before they realized there was money in it. Since then, they won't let anybody near their data. But looking at postings, who's posting to who, and how often, you get these same layers up. This is a very early Facebook data set before people were including everybody on it, so it only goes up to the 50 layer. The second one down is a Twitter data set. This is just looking at the Twitterati within a Twitter account, talking to each other, cross-posting to each other. Exactly the same layers, with almost the same numbers. Thankfully, it's a bit worrying actually if you think of Twitter, because these people are living online in their social world, if this is the only people they're talking to. Thankfully, the Twitter data set only goes up to 70, which means, yes, they must have some friends out there in the real world. Below that, the third layer line is a cell phone data set, So these are all massive, massive data sets, billions and billions of postings or phone calls. The cell phone data set, that goes right the way through. It's a bit on the low side, 134, but it's round about that 150 number. It's picking up the same layers again, and finally our face-to-face data set at the bottom. Exactly the same. What is uncanny is the frequencies. So each of these layers are defined by a specific frequency of contact. To keep somebody in that 5 layer, you have to see them at least once a week. At least once a week. To keep somebody in the 15 layer, you have to see them at least once a month, and so on. And we see exactly the same frequencies of contact in all these online digital data sets as well as offline. Okay, thanks. Next one. How do primates... just go back one actually. Let me just point out that 5 layer, okay, the 1.5 layer is your kind of romantic partners principally. That 5 layer is the one that's really critical for you. They're the shoulders to cry on, right? They're the people, and that's how we ask, when we ask people, how many people are in that layer, this is the definition we often give them. Who would you go to in moments of great crisis for support, emotional support, social support, financial support, whatever? Who would you, how many would you, and on average, it always comes out at about 5. Some people a bit less, some people a bit more, but 5 on average. Okay, we'll come back to that. Yep, next please. Okay, so how do we bond our relationships? Well, we're doing exactly the same way as primates do. For primates, it's a kind of dual process mechanism. There are 2 components to it that operate in tandem. One is a very deep pharmacological component, and it's related to this stuff here on the pictures, social grooming. Social grooming involves leafing through the fur and finding bits of rubbish and then removing it. But a lot of the time, most of the times, they're just leafing through the fur. So it's this kind of stroking activity. What that does is trigger the release of endorphins in the brain. Endorphins are part of the pain control system, pain management system, and they're opiates. The name endorphin is a contraction of endogenous opiate, because it's chemically very, very similar to morphine. Just slightly different, so you don't get addicted to it in the same way. But it's part of the pain mechanism, but it turns out to be very important in the way primates bond their friendships, if you like, their relationships. What that then does is create the opportunity for building a kind of high-level cognitive or psychological component, which is to do with the levels of trust and obligation and reciprocity in the relationships. So they're operating between these 2 levels, if you like, in tandem, and the 2 are crucially important together. Okay, next slide, please. Just to show you how important time is in this context, and remember for primates that's physical grooming. These are data from one of our big social network data sets, offline networks, and they're simply plotting the frequency per day with which you contact each individual in each of those layers. So left to right, they're the 5 layer, the 15 layer, 50 layer, 150 layer, and the 500 layer on the right-hand side. Just look at how much time you devote to those 5 people in the inner layer of your social network. You devote 40% of your total social effort, and that's effort whether we measure it as emotional commitment or time invested in them, to just 5 people. And then you invest another 20% to the extra 10 people in the 15 layer. So 60% of your time and effort is devoted to just 15 people, because they're the most important people to you. They typically tend to be half family, half friends. The 50 layer tends to be about 3/4 friends. The 150 layer tends to be more extended family rather than friends. Okay, next. And that's the reason for that split is partly reflected here. This particular graph has a very local resonance, because some very long time ago, shortly after the dinosaurs went extinct, we did a study on the use of mobile phones in maintaining relationships. And because the postdoc who did the study had been grown up here in Sheffield, he went back to his comprehensive school and asked if he could get some of the final year 6th formers to do it. So we had 30 people, we gave them 18 months free mobile phones so we could track who they were calling, and they had to fill in lots and lots of questionnaires for us at various intervals. And what these data are plotting here is the emotional closeness that they felt on average to all the members of their network, split by family or friends. So typically a network is half family, half friends for us. Right? And I just draw your attention, it's over 18 months, so we picked them up at Easter, just before A-levels, and then obviously 6 months in they all went off to university or work or whatever they did, and many of them moved away from Sheffield, and then we followed them for the whole of their first year, effectively at university. Right? If you look at their average sense of emotional closeness over that time span to their members of their extended family, this is not just their mum and dad and their brother and sister, this is the whole of their extended family, second cousins and all, it in general remains fairly stable, doesn't change very much. If anything, it goes up. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, but only to family. Look what happens to their friends. Their sense of emotional closeness just crashes when they leave. So this is the emotional closeness of their original set of friends at the start of the study. Out of sight, out of mind. Shocking. And of course the reason is, and you know this, you've done it here, it's because you're meeting lots of new people. And when you meet lots of new people, you've got this upper limit on the number of people you can cope with, you start to pull new people into higher positions in your network, and that means you're pushing out other people. Next, please. I don't know if you can see this. This is the same group of students looking at their phone call data rates over these 18-month period to their original family and friends in the sort of purple on top, and then their new friends coming in at successive stages when they first went away to university and then halfway through, the blue and the green. And you can see the purple is getting narrower, the number of family isn't changing, what's being squeezed out is old friends. They're just dropping down through the layers and being treated as less important. Okay, next. So the fundamentally important bit for friendship in primates in general is the amount of time they spend grooming. So this is just a plot of the amount of time devoted to grooming on average, on the y-axis there, plotted against social group size, average social group size, in a whole bunch of primate, monkey and ape species. So this is species averages, and what you can see is time spent grooming increases as group size get bigger, but it plateaus out at about 20% of the day. So 20% of the day is a fifth of the day some species are spending in this ostensibly useless activity of cuddling each other. And that's simply because they have to do other stuff. They've got to feed, and they've got to move from tree to tree to find enough food during the day. So that's partly pressure from that holds it down. You seem to have this upper limit there. Next, please. That triggering, that grooming that they're doing has this effect of triggering the endorphin system. And that sense of kind of light opiate high they get creates a sense of bonding with the individuals they actually do it with. Right? I mean, known from lab experiments on primates that that's what's going on. We weren't sure if this translated to humans. So I had some very nice collaborators in Finland who said, we can do it here. It's very expensive. We tried to get it done with the big cancer hospital at the University in Manchester, who'd got the right kind of imaging machine, a PET imaging. We tried to get it done in Oxford with the cancer machines there. They couldn't do it because they couldn't do the radioactive. And the Finns said, oh, no problem, we can do it. We've got a big machine, nobody ever uses it, hardly. So, next slide, please. We had a bunch of people go and have their brains scanned while they were being stroked. Right? Now, you know, hang on a minute, these are Finns. Finns don't get excited. They're very cool and relaxed. group of people. They're not like, you know, British who get excited the moment anybody touches them. You know, Finns spend all day naked in the sauna with each other. You know, this is nothing new for them. Anyway, what we did was we got a bunch of blokes and had them put their heads in the scanner while their partners, girlfriends, wives, whatever, stroke their chest. They were only not allowed to go below the belt, just on their chest. Because we thought that if we could show this with blokes, right, we could show it with anybody. Right? Because girls are much more intensely social than boys. Much more intensely social than boys. So if you're going to have a thing that's underpinning that, if you can show it exists in boys, it's going to exist in everybody. These brain pictures here simply show the brain firing up, the endorphin receptors in the brain firing up in response to being stroked, compared with the sort of, you have to do it twice. I mean, this is a nasty thing to do because you're injecting radioactive dyes into them, and you have to do it twice. Once to get a baseline, when they've just, nothing's happened to them, and then once while they're being stroked again. So you have to give them 2 doses of radioactivity, which means you can't have it too close together. So you have to come into the lab for the whole day and be irradiating. Luckily, it's not too much, so it's not dangerous for you, but still, it's not pleasant. So what you're seeing is the difference between the sort of baseline and after they're being stroked. And the brain is absolutely going mad. All the red and yellow bits are receptors absorbing the endorphins being pumped out of the endorphin neurons within the brain. The only bit that isn't really highlighted is that bit at the left. If you look at the middle one, on the left-hand side at the back, there's a bit where there's all grey, and that's because that's the visual system, and nothing else. That's just processing visual input. So here's evidence that stroking, as in the sense of grooming in primates, still works with us, still produces the same thing. And we kind of forget how important touch actually is for us, right? In social contexts. You're doing it all the time when you're with people. You know, you're patting them on the shoulder, putting your arm around them, ruffling their hair, or whatever it is you do with people. And all over Europe, we did a mass survey all over Europe, including here, Finland, Russia, Italy, France, I think, looking at where people allow other people to touch them. And it turns out there's a very, very tight correlation across all these countries. So you've got sort of, you know, Italians who are kind of all over you and cuddling you and double kissing you and all this kind of stuff all the time. And then us Brits, you know, who don't touch me, I'm British. But it turned out, you know, the differences between the different cultures, if you like, were relatively small. What was really important was how close the relationship. The closer the relationship, and the more often you see them, the more of the body you allow them to touch. Which is sort of partly why we do kind of ritualized things like shaking hands with complete strangers, because that formalizes it. This is the one bit you'll allow anybody to touch. Right? Anywhere else is getting more personal. So here it is. We still use it, but the big problem with it, as with monkeys and apes, is it's A, it's very intimate, B, it's very, very time consuming. So the number of individuals you can go around and kind of cuddle in a given period of time with sufficient frequency is very small. That's what sets the upper limit on group size in primates to about 50. And there's a very nice demonstration at the back. So. Well done. So the question is, when we wanted to try and increase our group sizes above those typical of primates, that 50 limit that you get in primates, on average, remember these are averages, pushing up our group sizes to 150 or even beyond, to 500 and 1500 and to our mega communities, how on earth do we do it? Because the mechanism that underpins the whole system is very, very, very small scale. So we had to find ways of increasing the number of people you could, in a sense, touch in a limited amount of time. Okay, next please. Oh, I beg your pardon, I forgot to tell you about this first. This is really cool stuff, because this is, I hope you can see, it's probably a bit faint. these are the so-called afferency tactile, or CT neurons. They were only discovered about 10, 12 years ago. It turns out that they're all over the body. They go from the hairy skin, so at the roots of the hair follicles, and they go straight into the brain. So unlike your pain neurons, which are very, very fast because they're myelinated, they've got this fatty insulating sheath around them, which allows them to travel very fast, and they have a return loop. These CT neurons are unmyelinated, so they're extremely slow, and they only go one way. There's no return loop. So pain receptors have this return loop which causes you to withdraw your hand from the fire when you feel the pain, right? These CT neurons don't. They just go into the brain, and they go into the endorphin neurons in the brain and trigger the endorphin system. And they respond to only one stimulus, and that is light, slow stroking at a very specific rate. It's about 2 centimeters a second. And these turn out to be all over the body, all over the hairy parts of the body, even our relatively hairless parts. And why you get this endorphin kick in. It turns out the inner ear is massively loaded with these things. They've only discovered this a year ago. Your inner ear, where your balance organ is when you're hearing, particularly your balance organ, is massively loaded with CT neurons. And when my collaborator in Liverpool and I heard about this, we went, that's why you rock babies, right? What you're doing is triggering the endorphin system. That's why they quieten down and go to sleep. That's also why you bang your head when you're dancing and listening to music. And that's why you feel so good afterwards. Right? All right, next. Right. So the question is, how do we get over this limitation? Well, we think that it happened in a series of stages as we tried to push group size further and further up. Next, please. And they came in this order. First of all, laughter. Laughter is something we share with great apes, and it's very, very visceral, right? If you hear a joke, if you're sitting around a table, let's say with a bunch of Mongolians, and somebody tells a joke in Mongolian, and you don't know a word of Mongolian, everybody bursts out laughing. You cannot help laughing, right? You go to a stand-up comedy show, you didn't hear what the comic said, but everybody around you laughed, and you can't help laughing. It's extraordinary. Because if you did this and you were sitting on the other side of the pub, and you heard a group of people laughing on the other side, your response would be, what lunatics are they? Right? It's very specific to you being in that group and engaged with them. Something very, very intensely social about it. Then kicks in wordless singing, so chorusing, humming, whatever you want to call it. Singing, so this is long before language appears. Singing and dancing. Then language arrives, and we get the rituals of religion and storytelling. And then probably about the same time, we get these two other key effects that come in. Drinking alcohol, making and drinking alcohol, and social eating. And all of these trigger the endorphin system. But it turns out you don't get addicted to the alcohol when you get addicted to the alcohol. It's the endorphins you get addicted to. So, as you may know, when you go to alcoholics clinic, what they give you is an endorphin blocker, naltrexone and naloxone, which locks onto the receptor sites in the brain for endorphins, but is pharmacologically neutral, so you don't get any kind of hit at all. All you get is the bad side of it, if you like. That weans you off it very quickly. Right, next please. Where are we going to go? So, oops, yes, that's it. So here are the last two. I'm going to talk mainly about this. Well, inevitably, the alcohol is part of it. But what's interesting about all of these, but especially these two, is you can't do them online, right? You have to be there, in person. You have to see the whites of their eyes, literally in front of you, and physically be able to grab them, in other words, touch them, in order for this effect to really work and for you to be able to build up friendships. Okay, next please. So we did this study, it wasn't a study, it was a survey, national survey, with the Big Lunch, which some of you may know, part of the Eden Project, and they try and get everybody to shut off their street for one Saturday in the year and have lunch together. Last year, just over 9 million people in Britain closed their roads off, put the trestle tables out and had lunch together. It's 20% of the entire population, and it's going up year by year, which is amazing, really. Next, please. What we asked people in the survey, so we didn't actually look at the people having lunch together, but we did a national survey to look at their eating habits and their friendship habits. So this plot here on the left simply distinguishes people who have dinner together regularly, and people who, so they're the black dots, and people who tend to eat on their own, or always eat on their own, solitary diners. And on the left-hand side is the mean rating for, at the bottom, their sense of, from left to right, their sense of belonging to the community, that they feel engaged with the community they live among, their trust of other members of the community, particularly strangers, how worthwhile life is, they feel that their life is, how happy they were yesterday, and how satisfied they are with their life to date. And just look at the difference. In each case, social diners score significantly higher than people who don't dine together. Next. And we also asked them, how many friends do you have in that inner core 5 circle? And this is now plotted against the frequency with which they had social dinners each week. So obviously some of those are with family, but many of them will be with friends. And you can see the more often you eat socially, the more friends you have in that inner core circle. And that is extending out, scaling up to the size of your social network as well. Okay, next please. We asked them what it was when you had dinner with a friend you hadn't seen for a while, and you felt that you had re-engaged with them and it was a great evening. What was it that happened in that dinner? What things happened? And here are the list of things, the number of diners, on average three and a half, that's very close, it's about the average size of a conversation. You cannot have more than 4 people in a conversation, right, by the way. I'll bet you anything you like that if the next conversation you're in which a 5th person joins, that will be 2 conversations within about 15 or 20 seconds. It's extraordinary. Not quite sure why, but it's an extremely robust effect. Right? But that's just to give you a sense that these are very similar to what you see in everyday conversations. Right? The things that happened are the ones that are highlighted. Laughter, 70% laughter happened. 50% of occasions there were reminiscences being told, and 50% there was alcohol. The other things were much less important. Jokes underpinning laughter in a way, but because laughter is so visceral and emotional and not, you don't need jokes to start it off. The two are very different. The key things here really are the amount of laughter and the storytelling. Storytelling is really important, and the more emotional it is, I hasten to say, the better. You can understand why comedy works and why comedy in the sense of Shakespeare's drama works. When people laugh, then they get an endorphin hit and they feel very happy. But why on earth do you go and see tragedies? King Lear, Macbeth, whatever. You know, when you'd expect that people would go, God, I can't stand that stuff, I'm not going again. But we don't, we keep going back and back and back. And we did an experiment with a Channel 4 film called Stuart, A Life Backwards. I don't know if any of you have come across it. It's actually based on a book, which is based on a true story. And Stuart is a down and out in Cambridge, and the person who wrote the book and befriended him in a down and out sort of dining in place. They started to collaborate on writing this book together. This is an emotionally gripping film. The book is called Stuart, A Life Backwards, and you can buy that and read it, because it's an amazing story. But this was trying to explain how Stuart got to where he was, down and out, ex-drug addict, in and out of prison. He'd been bullied as a child, been abused as a child, he was half crippled. His life was a complete and awful mess. And you know where this is going. It's not going to end in a pleasant place, and indeed it doesn't. He ends up committing suicide because he can't stand it any longer. And the book was finished off by this young academic who befriended him as a kind of tribute to Stuart. The film is absolutely wonderful. It has Tom Hardy playing Stuart and Benedict Cumberbatch playing whatever his friend is, the academic. And in terms of sheer character acting, it is absolutely astounding. But it's emotionally ringing. But it turns out, and what we showed with this stuff, is that people who respond to this emotionally and get very kind of weepy for it, their pain thresholds rise, and they suddenly love everybody, all these strangers that they watch this film with. They were all just groups of random people, right? And this explains why, having a good cry, you feel so much better afterwards. You give yourself a little high. But also, it kind of points to the fact that the reason for this is where we feel psychological pain is exactly the same bit of the brain as where we feel physical pain. It's actually triggering the endorphin system. All right, so look, next please. So, the other thing we could do with our data is try and look at the causal relationships in here. It's a big kind of massive, great statistical analysis looking at the various components, social eating and the number of intimate friends you've got over there on the upper left, engagement with the community, trust in your neighbours, how worthwhile life is, happiness, life satisfaction. And the arrows show the causal directions as pulled out by statistical analysis. And I just show you, next please. So there's social eating and there's intimate friends. They bounce backwards and forwards off each other. The more often you eat with people, the more friends you have. The more friends you have, of course, the more often you eat with people. But then what seems to happen is social eating produces this loop that goes round through life satisfaction, happiness, worthwhileness, into trusting your neighbours and your sense of engagement with the community. So your whole kind of nature of your sense of trust and contentedness with the wider community with which you live really comes out of just eating regularly socially. Next please. So this is what seems to happen. Friends provide you with direct support, and that seems to have a knock-on consequence for your health. But what also, it seems, turns out to be really important is the endorphins seem to tune the immune system. Right? So you're getting this health benefit from eating socially through two separate routes. One is from having more friends, and the other is a direct benefit through the endorphin system actually making you more resistant to diseases, it seems. There's not a lot of, it hasn't really been looked at, but there's some nice biochemical evidence to support that. So it seems the endorphin system, when it kicks off, kicks out the killer T cells that are responsible for killing off all these bugs that get into your system. Okay, next. So, a very simple message. The more often you eat socially, the more friends you'll have. The happier you're going to feel, the more you're going to trust your neighbours, and the healthier you're going to be. Next. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you. That was really great. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, in the front.
Yeah, so some questions about your research design. So feminist philosophy of science has consistently shown that when you do research just on men, you find that the results reflect masculine bias, masculine events. So why did you feel comfortable not researching women in that case in Finland, when feminist philosophy of science and feminist analyses of science have consistently shown that these kinds of effects aren't reproducible across gender?
Because of what we had previously learnt about the nature of sociality in men and women. What are data really show is that men and women live in two very different kinds of social worlds. One is much more intensely social than the other. So since we were interested in this pharmacological underpinning, and remember it's only one part of the story, there's all this kind of cultural stuff that sits on top, and in humans that cognitive psychological stuff really is about cultural things. They're kind of, in a sense, cultural icons, because you're measuring up how similar somebody else is to you, right? So they're very, very cultural, and change in an individual through life. But the pharmacological underpinning seems to be true for everybody. We all have endorphins. I think women have a higher pain threshold than men have more endorphin receptors, but that's the only difference. So our figuring was, you have to make a value judgment here, right, when you're doing these kind of studies, particularly with imaging, because imaging is extremely expensive, right? When we ask about the costings of these, the guys in London that we went to after Oxford and Manchester, in the end, couldn't do it for us. We tried a lab in London, and they said they would charge us 10,000 per person, right, per shot. In Finland, we paid £500, because they weren't charging us all the ancillary costs. They weren't charging us with the crash team that has to be there, and the medic, and all that kind of stuff. Right, it's still very expensive, even in Finland. So there's a limit on the number you can do. Now the problem with imaging is it's very, very sensitive. Right? If somebody moves their head a tiny, tiny bit in the scanner, throws the whole thing out, and your blobs are going in the wrong place. So you have to do everything you can to try and narrow down that variability. And we just figured that if there are going to be sex differences, which is kind of exactly what you're alluding to, in responsiveness, the sensible thing is not to mix them, because we're going to increase the variability then. What we want to do is just have one sex and try and eliminate some of the range of variation, normal range of variation. And then we figured, well, which sex do you go for, men or women? Your temptation always is to go for the girls, because girls volunteer much more than blokes. Right? So it's much easier to get volunteers for an experiment. But we figured in this case, the sensible thing was to go with blokes, because blokes are just less responsive to these, in these social contexts, right? So if we could show it with blokes, it was going to work with the girls for sure. It would be nice to do it, and at some point somebody will do it with the girls. But if it didn't work with the girls, I would eat my hat. I really would. Everything else we know about the nature of our social world just points to the fact that girls are much better. This goes back to the cognition that underpins sociality. So this is what's known as theory of mind, or mentalizing. It's the ability to understand what somebody else is thinking, right, rather than just responding to what they're doing. Girls are much better than women. Okay, guys, sorry. Girls are a little bit better. But consistently so, right? And they consistently have more friends at any of these layers, and so on and so forth. I don't know if that satisfies you completely, but that was the logic. Yeah.
How do long-distance relationships fit into this? Is it just about frequency, or does it matter?
I would hazard the guess. The short answer is with difficulty, right? And simply because, so if the relationship has already been established and you get separated, and it's very intense, a very close relationship, then that intensity will keep it going, right? But in the absence of that intensity, so that means it really probably has to be a very close romantic-like or very intense friendship to keep it there. Because what seems to happen is that the less often you see people, the consequence of that is they simply slide down through the layers. So they start out in the inner centre, you lose about one standard deviation a year of the quality of the relationship for not seeing somebody, right? That's not our data, that's data from America. So it must be true. But what effectively that's pretty much telling you is one layer. You're sliding down a whole layer out of those layers. So after 4 years, somebody who was in the inner layer will end up as an acquaintance, 4 or 5 years. I hedge a bit on that inner layer because I think that inner layer is so ground in stone, and you will see this, right, in 30 or 40 years' time, when you come to meet up with your cohort at school, high school, or university. Most of them, you're going to go, oh, for goodness sakes, was I really a friend of them? You know, they're awful. But there will be just a couple of people who you can pick up that relationship exactly where you left it off, even though you haven't seen them for 30 or 40 years. And those will always be the people you had the most intense social experiences in life with. Right? So they're the ones that you always go dancing with, you always go drinking with, you do a lot of laughing with, you have lots of deep, meaningful discussions with. And those friendships seem to last much better. The rest die away very quickly. But and herein lies the secret of Facebook's success, we think, is because remember what it was set up for? It was set up essentially for a bunch of college kids who are going to be leaving very soon afterwards and disappearing all over America, to keep them in contact, essentially. And it does that very well. So it allows you to keep that relationships going. But we actually think nothing on earth, not even Facebook, will keep those relationships going forever. All it's doing is slowing down the rate of decay. And the weaker the friendship, the quicker the decay will be. So I think with a kind of very intense, close friendship or romantic relationship, it'll keep it going for much longer, but sooner or later it's going to fade. And sooner or later, part of that is somebody else comes along and you kind of strike up a new relationship. And the key here is, and this is actually one of the big differences between the blokes and the girls, is that inner core of 5. Remember, they are the shoulders to cry on. They're your deep emotional support. Now, what happens with Facebook is when you separate, move apart, one goes to Thailand and the other stays here, you're on Facebook all the time trying to keep those relationships going because they're important to you. But you have to ask the question, is that a wise thing to do? Because when the crisis hits you, they aren't going to be physically there for you to cry on their shoulder. Right? And I invite you to walk out there tonight and try this, right? With a random stranger. My boyfriend stroke girlfriend has just abandoned me. Can I cry on your shoulder? Right? What is their response going to be? They're going to grab their phone and dial 999. It really needs to be an intense relationship. That relationship has to be set up years, months and years in advance of need. This is what primates are essentially doing with their close grooming relationships. You have to set these relationships up. It's one of the key characteristics of primate coalitions, that they are built over very long periods of time in anticipation of future need, and they're lifelong. Right? Very different from almost all other mammals and birds. Now, if you're trying to maintain relationships online, on Facebook, the trade-off you're making is that one day you'll get back together again, right? So you think that sooner or later you really have to see the whites of their eyes and be able to grab hold of them to put the relationship back up to where it was, otherwise it will just keep on eventually dying. But the big difference here is between blokes and girls, because girls have these very intense relationships, best friends forever. Sort of foreign concept to boys. Not to say, this is a cartoon version, it's not to say that boys never have them or that all girls have them. But in general, these are very important in girls' social lives. Boys tend to live in clubs, and they tend to live in clubs of about 4 or 5. Major crisis. Now for boys, a friendship is standing on opposite sides of the road kicking a football back. Now I swear that actually it doesn't make any difference to boys whether it's a little boy on the other side of the road kicking the football back or a wall. as long as the football comes back, that's a friendship. And you tell me if that's not true.
That's not true!
It is.
Why is that? Why is it different? What's it about?
I think women just live in much more intense social worlds than men do, and this is true of all primates.
But why? What, from an evolutionary point of view? What's
because that social support that the females give each other and provide for each other massively affects their fertility, their own survival. How long? There's very massive data now from monkeys and apes showing this in the wild, that the more grooming partners, female grooming partners a female has, the higher her fertility is, the higher the probability is her offspring will survive to adulthood, the more likely she is to have, they will be to have grandchildren, the longer she will live in her own. That effect appears to be specific to females. It's a peculiarity of the way primate sociality works, and we are simply bounced off the back of that. Right, I'm conscious of the fact that...
Maybe time for one more.
One more, okay, yours.
Right, yeah, going back to the bar chart that you showed us at the beginning, the sort of survival rates after a heart attack.
Yes.
And that sort of quality and number of friendships was like the highest bar there.
Yeah.
I feel like when we're brought up, we're kind of we're kind of taught that it's okay to be different, so it's kind of okay to be gay, or it's okay to be a bit overweight.
Yep.
It's okay to be an introvert. What you're kind of saying, actually, no, it's not okay. Actually, yeah, introversion is not really a thing. Introverts actually be much happier if they have lots of friends and they put themselves out there.
No, that's a perfectly logical deduction, right? Perfectly logical. But I don't think that's actually true. On average, that's how it's coming out, right? But the world does consist of, I mean, it's a continuum of introverts to extroverts, and this is obviously true of both sexes. Turns out the big difference between introverts and extroverts is simply how you partition your social capital, right? They both have, or everybody has, on average, the same amount of social capital and social time available. Introverts prefer to have fewer friends so they can devote more time to each of them, therefore their relationships are much stronger. And extroverts prefer to have more friends and give each of them less time, so they have weaker relationships. Right? So the key to this is the inner core of your friends. Right? Now that's true of both introverts and extroverts. They all have that inner layer of 5. The big difference is the outer layers. Introverts will tend to be down towards 100 for their total network. Extroverts will be towards 200. So that's why you get an average in the middle of about 150. But they all have this inner core of 5, and it's that set of friends that seems to be, and family, remember, it's half family, half friends, that's what seems to be really crucial in providing these support mechanisms.
So do you think that introverts can only be friends with other introverts? Because let's say that let's say that one of your top 15 friends was actually how you ranked with them. You were only in their top 50.
Yep.
So you were getting. Would that be a satisfying friendship? I mean, you're getting a lot less back than you're putting in.
Up to a point, that is probably true. I'm thinking we've often wondered how this is going to work, because if you are, let's say the average range of variation typically for that inner core is between 3 and 7 for most people, the range of variation. If you're a 3er, would you be happier with a bunch of 3ers, or how would you feel about having some 7ers in there? It probably is going to be disruptive. And in fact, we did a study a couple of years ago, it's still not published yet, with a fraternity at a Dutch university. So these are major, these are not fraternities in the American sense, these are serious, lifelong friendships that they build up, and they're more than halls of residence. I mean, these are standalone, a bit like colleges, really. because they're run by the students, but they actually have their own property, their own rooms and houses that they rent out to members. And they're very kind of, what's the word I want, selective about who can join. You compete to join different fraternities. But those relationships they build in there are lifelong. They go to each other's funerals, literally go to each other's funerals. And it turns out that when they form these sort of little groupings in there, they tend to be more similar to each other in terms of their social style. This goes back to a fact which was first picked up in the sociological literature probably about 20 years ago or so, but has been just found all over the place, and that is the effect of what's known as homophily, right? The people you have the strongest relationships with is people who are most like you in all sorts of different ways. So they have the same views as you, they have the same interests as you, they have the same religion as you. You name it, the list is massive. It actually even applies to gender. Right? Social networks are very, very highly gendered. About 70% of men's social networks consist of men, and about 70% of women's social networks consist of women. There's a sense in which people are happier talking to people who are more like them, if you like, which clearly, in our globalised world, is not a great idea, right? There's a problem that has to be overcome. But it is such a robust effect, and almost everything that people have looked at, your educational levels, almost anything you look at, any cultural things, your friends are predominantly like you, and that's what makes those friendships, because it provides you with something, in effect, something to talk about. Right? So you've got a basis for a relationship, and particularly for building a relationship. If you've had a relationship for a very long time, you don't need to talk to them because you know how they feel. Right? That's why old folk, old couples, sit glumly staring into their beer and don't talk to each other in the pub. Your parents. Young folk chatter because they're in the process, mostly, of building relationships. And what you're doing is trying to find out what this other person is like and how similar they are to you. This is what I've come to call the 7 pillars of friendship. Right? So there are 7 dimensions to friendship. They're a bit like barcodes, supermarket barcodes on your forehead. They're all cultural. They all change through your life. But the more of those barcodes you have in common with somebody, the stronger your friendship will be, the higher up in the inner circles they will be, and the more likely you are to be altruistic. Those 7 barcodes are speaking the same language, which obviously helps if you're going to have a conversation, since everything else is based on conversation, or better still, dialect. And we're very, very sensitive to dialects. You can place a native English speaker to within 30 kilometres of where they were born by their dialect. It's amazing. And I'm told by Germans and French folk that that's almost certainly true there too. This has been known for a long time, since the 70s, by the social linguists. Language, shared educational experience, and obviously even better still if you've been to the same university or done the same course, same hobbies and interests, same worldview. Worldview is a mixture of your political views, your religious views, and your moral views. Same musical tastes, and musical tastes turn out to be the best for connecting with strangers, and especially if the musical tastes are a bit unusual, rare. And finally, the same sense of humour. And the fact that somebody shares them, we did an experiment with this, which I won't go into, but what it showed was that the more similar your sense of humour was to somebody else, the more likely you felt you would make a friendship with them, and the more willing you were going to be to lend them 50 quid or whatever. These are all things which kind of define small communities. If you think about all of those, coming from the same place is the last one. That's say growing up in the same place seems to be really important. All of them point to a small community you grew up in, and that community works because you know how they think, you know how much you can trust them, you know when people say they will do this, that's what they mean. You know how to interpret what they say. When they say silly me don, drop the ball, you know immediately, if you're a cricketer, what they're talking about. If you're not a cricketer, you don't. Right? So all these little things kind of define these very, very small-scale communities, and those are the communities we trust. My pitch, if you like, on this is we have a serious problem in this globalized world, is how can you scale up these mechanisms which are designed to create very, very small-scale communities into mega communities, even just something as big as Yorkshire, never mind the rest of Britain. Never mind, the rest of Europe while you're at it. I mean, these things, these mechanisms we use, both in creating friendships and in creating the communities around that, are designed to be very small scale, and it's very difficult to see how you can scale them up. The one that does work well is religion. That's very, very clear, which may or may not be to your taste. But that really seems to create mega communities that are quite intense. When you think about what goes on in religion, religious services and the like, a lot of it has to do with endorphin triggering mechanisms. So a lot of synchrony, doing behaving in a synchronized way, as in dancing, or as in standing up and kneeling and all this kind of thing, for praying, singing, if your religion does singing. All these things trigger the endorphin system. Fire and damnation sermons, as in Presbyterianism, it's a very good way of triggering the endorphin system. It binds the community together, binds the congregation together.
For those of you who didn't get a chance to ask questions, you may get a chance later this evening as we move to sharing some food together, which is really exciting. We've got a team of volunteers, community members of Foodhall, who have been cooking, I think, all day, basically, and they've made loads and loads of Moroccan food. It's all vegan. It's going to be delicious. There's quite a lot of you here.